I managed to get all the rust cleaned out of the pump halves. Looks a heck of a lot better here now. And the valve on that side, just inside over here, it's working fine now. Nothing is stuck. And the priming valve is okay as well too, so we're all set to go over there. But I did decide to go ahead and replace the bushing. Have to be very careful taking them out because they partially cut them like I did over here. You can just gently tap them out without touching the sides of your pump, which is a lot easier said than done. You have to be very, very careful about that. And now to put the new bushing in, sometimes life is a bit of a compromise, so looked around for something off of my weight set. Makes a perfect tapping in tool. And of course we're going to pad it up on top over here with a little bit of cloth to keep from getting any nicks from the cast iron piece over. But that has a little bit of weight to it that'll carry, and I'll just gently tap the piece down. You'll feel it as it's going in. After a while you get the feel of if something is cocking to one side or something, but we'll see what will happen here. So far it's felt so good. Gently around and around and around. You can feel if it's getting stuck on an edge. You can feel it going down bit by bit. Yeah, we're going slowly though, but slow and steady. So only have one chance with this. Yeah, 2/3 down. Just about there. Just about flush. It's bottomed. There you go. One bushing put in. Nice and neat, nice and flush over there. Perfect. All said and done. Now we can put the front seal back on, but we just have to tie it up just a little bit in here, make sure no dirt got in there. Now to put the front seal on. Manufacturer recommends putting on a non-hardening sort of sealer. 1964 silicone adhesives or glues weren't invented then, but I guess that's as close as we'll come to what they wanted in 1964. So just around the edge of it, put a little bit on. I'll put a little bit of Vaseline around the lip of the seal so it has a fighting chance when the converter is put onto the car, or onto the transmission I should say. Just a little bit, you don't need too much, just enough to seal an edge and that's all, because you don't want this stuff getting into the transmission or anything like that. Okay, just get a little bit of lube for that, Vaseline stuff. Don't have to get one to touch the other while we're doing this operation. Okay, there we go. Now again, without the advantage of having a press, we've got to do the old smacking with a piece of wood, maybe even jumping on the piece of wood after, but I think this one will go in with just a little bit of smacking with the hammer. There we go. Perfect. All done. All done. We're all ready to put the pump back together again. Here we go. One thing I should have shown when I was cleaning the pump and just doing some general checks was the actual checking of clearances for the pump gears themselves. Now, according to the book, and this is very important because if there's too much slack in between the edges of these things and they're worn out too much, the transmission might work okay when it's cold, but as soon as it warms up and the fluid starts to thin out, you're going to start losing hydraulic pressure, much as excessive clearance in engine bearings that cause you to lose oil pressure the same way. The specifications on both of them call for between 0.0035 to 0.0065. That's on the outer diameter over here. And on the inner, where the gear meets this part of the crescent, it calls for 0.003 to 0.009. So we're going with something pretty much in the middle of the road. We're going with a 0.004 straight up, just like that. And with that, it fits nice and snug over here, so you know right away that we have pretty much our good clearance. As a matter of fact, it's even getting stuck on me. But that's out now. Same thing for over here, in between. Yep. Nice and firm going in there. This, of course, would be how the converter would be held in over this. There's always going to be a little bit of clearance here, so you really can't tell by that. Almost be impossible, but general bet, this is okay, that's okay. You know your clearances are going to be okay, and the gears themselves don't look scored or anything damaged, so we're pretty much good to go on this one. Again, I was already checked, but just to show you how it's done. Important steps, attention to detail. Okay, what we're doing here is, you notice I have the pump installed into the transmission case backwards. The reason being is that we have to make do with all the tools that we have at hand. I don't have a constrictor strap to put around the two pump halves to align them perfectly, so the next best thing is put the pump halves inside the case, or the loose pump halves inside the case, and that way they'll align themselves properly, and then you won't have any problems afterwards, of course, installing the tightened up pump back in the case once you have all the other components back into the unit. Another very important reason is that the torque converter, the bushing that we installed, we don't want it pushing too hard by even a couple of thousandths of an inch on one side of that new bushing, because otherwise you're going to wear it, you can score it, and even cause it to spin, and then that will just ruin your whole job. So just a little attention to detail, once again, that will always help out. So once it's tightened up and torqued down, the bolts, we'll take it out and we'll show the rest of the components being assembled into the case, and then we'll start to work on the valve body. Once you have this tightened up, and in general the pump should be able to slide in and out of the case without much force or bang, smashing or reefing, especially once you've gotten everything cleaned up and lined up properly. It's understandable if it's been in there for like 30 or 40 years that you might have to, but this is just to show that if everything is aligned properly, it should come out with just like, let's say, a little bit of prying with a wooden instrument over here, in this case a hammer handle. You don't want to be smacking on it with a sharp metal object or anything like that, but let's see what will happen. Yeah, that means we're pretty much in proper alignment over here, it looks like. If you ever meet any resistance after doing these things, always stop, go back and double check, because you can't force things to make them fit and make them work in the transmission. They have to be able to work in harmony with each other, because if you force anything, obviously what that means is that it's going to be wearing pretty bad against something else, and there's a problem. And you don't want things wearing into each other, so to speak, because that just makes metal particles and all sorts of problems that can pop up later on. So that's just one more little step and little tip and attention to detail that we have to take. Very well, I needed both hands to get the high drum and the input shaft back in, and I don't want to upset the balance of the transmission too much. It's something going to be laid down after I finish working on it here for this session, but pretty much putting these parts back in, you got to make sure that it's pretty much, I guess, like setting a mousetrap. You got to get everything ready in sequence and putting the cheese in without having the thing snap on you and hurt you in any way. So and make sure, like I said, they're put in right. In this case, the low band, you don't want to put them backwards because there's a single lug here. And then we have our double lug over here that goes onto the adjusting strut. Single lug goes onto the servo piston rod, and double one goes onto the strut over here, which then attaches to the adjusting screw. That's actually one of the last steps involved with this over here. So now we'll get ready to put the new case to O-ring flat gasket. That's the old one. And of course the new O-ring, or excuse me, flat round ring that goes around here. And the book says to use, quote, a non-hardening sealant again around this surface over here. So I take it in 21st century words, they must mean silicone glue. Because silicone glue wasn't invented until the NASA program later in the 60s for use on the Apollo spacecraft, from what I understand and remember correctly. But anyway, onwards we go. Double checking the book once again, it says no sort of sealer is actually needed around the circumference of the pump to case O-ring, as it's called. So we won't do that. I actually found it a little bit interesting that they would have mentioned that, because as far as I'm concerned, if your surfaces are good, this should be sealing on that with absolutely no problem whatsoever. But now, interesting on these transmissions, and I've seen it on some of the newer ones, like the 4L80Es even, for example, these tiny little O-rings have to go onto the pump to case bolts. So we're going to have to be careful with those too. I had to pry out the old ones, which are underneath here inside each hole, clean them out a little bit, but just go show all these tiny little things. Any one of them can lead to a pretty ugly leak if you're not careful. Anyway, we're pretty much ready to assemble the pump on. I'll put a little bit of transmission oil around the outer edges over just to help this thing to slide in a little bit easier, and we'll take it from there. I said seriously, and one day I will get a tripod. I know I keep saying that, but there's really no big deal. You can see it in plenty of other spots. I'm sure you've done it before, putting one of these things on. Well, maybe not into a transmission, but just the whole idea of getting parts to fit without pinching O-rings or seals or anything like that. So I'll give it a quick wipe down actually, because there seems to be just a touch of dirt there. So we'll be back in a few minutes once the pump is placed on, and then we'll do the installing of the bolt sequence. A very non-invasive way of putting the front pump on is, of course, to put on all your bolts just to make sure everything lines up, because it's so easy. You think you might have it on, but you could just be off by one bolt in these things. After you get the pump pulled on, that means you're going to start tapping things off to get it realigned and everything. That always leads to a chance of damaging a new gasket, so we want to get it right on the first shot over here, obviously. Best way to do it is to find two bolts that are more or less directly apart from each other. So in the case we're going to use these two, and we're just going to very, very gently pull this unit on. You should just turn with your hand on the ratchet just like that. You shouldn't have to force it or anything. It should literally just feel its own way on. And of course all the other bolts are being used as alignment pins. See, it's just pulling itself on very, very easily over there. No force at all is being used here. It's very politely going on over here. You can see how it's shifting around up here on the input shaft versus the stator support shaft. I want to try to keep everything in the middle. We might pull this one back a little bit now over here. As long as the input shaft is turning, you know nothing is binding or anything. So you know so far so good. And we'll pretty soon be home free. Like I said, there's no O-rings on the bolts yet, because it's just a snugging down sequence just to make sure everything goes on properly. I know I sound like a broken record, but I can't overemphasize the attention to detail part when working on these things. It's off there, means it's not on fully on this side, so bring it back that way a little bit. That way you're not distressing your Teflon sealing rings, because those aren't quite as strong. Well, they're stronger than the cast iron ones because they're a lot more flexible, but they also pinch a lot easier. So of course we're going to do air pressure checks before we really put anything fully back together, like meaning the valve body on, to make sure that all the components are working. But So this is just a very important step. See, stugging everything down bit by bit. This is pretty much bottomed out. We'll make sure our input shaft is turning. Perfect. Nothing's binding, nothing is stuck. Nothing is stuck there, that's great. Yeah, turning. Perfect. Nothing's stuck, nothing's binding. Looks like we're okay to go. We'll be back for the installation of the little O-ring seals on the pump bolts. Any chances whatsoever with this transmission. These are very well known for leaking when they're parked for any length of time. What we have in the kit are we have some, looks like rubber coated flat washers, and of course the O-rings that came with the original setup. Now the O-rings themselves, once the bolts are tightened on, they just settle into these holes over here where the bolts go. So sitting like a shoulder pretty much in there like that, except it's tucked in obviously. But just to be absolutely sure, I'm going to use the double method over here, because if it's going to try to sneak through one, then hopefully it won't sneak through the other, any chances of oil leak. So we're just going to do the procedure like that pretty much. So it's flattened out nicely. Let's see what happened. Take it out. Let's see if it actually is staying stuck in the hole. The rubber washer. Oh, it's staying where it should, but anyway, away it goes. We will have the double sealing of this over here, and that should work just fine for us. We'll be back once we have this landed tuna back lying on its side. Well, looking very, very closely at the bolts that hold the pump case to the transmission case, there's slight grooves and looks like the heads of the bolts that hold the O-rings. So it looks like it'll be a double good over here upon closer examination, of course, with the new O-rings, plus with these washers that they also supply in the kit too. So we sort of have a backup against if one piece starts to leak versus the other. So we'll go with that idea. Well, it sort of reminds me of a landed fish. That's why I'm calling this thing a tuna fish again now. But anyway, thing turns fine. Nothing is stuck. Nothing is jammed. Band's in place, ready to, excuse me, ready to be attached. But we're going to get a real project going. That's going to be this whole shift mechanism, which is like a whole Chinese chicken wing spaghetti mess of parts and things, and we'll get into that. Then we'll get into the valve body. I don't know which is more of a nightmare or a challenge, but we'll get to them. On we go.